Brilliant. Right. So today we are joined by Jessica Hunhan Young. Jessica has fast become one of the most popular go-to lighting designers across the UK, with multiple awards to her name, including a Night of Illumination Award for her work on Equus at Theatre Royal Stratford East and Trafalgar Studios. She must have one of the busiest diaries in the business. In fact, only yesterday it was announced that she would be making her debut at the Royal National Theatre and in the Olivier Theatre, no less. Previous productions include work with companies such as the Donmar Warehouse, The Gate, Young Vic, Royal Court, The Yard, Home, Bristol Old Vic, Volts Festival, and English Theatre Frankfurt. So welcome, Jess, and thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us.
No, thank you for having me, and hello everyone.
I wonder if we could just start off with a little bit about you and your background and the route that you took to get to where you are now.
Cool. So I started doing lighting when I was at GCSE drama, and I took GCSE drama. Actually, let's start from the very beginning, which is I come from Essex. So I come from a place called Buckhurst near to Woodford on the Central Line towards Epping. And I grew up there. And so I went to a high school called Trinity Catholic High School. And at GCSE, I was like, hey, I need to pass GCSE. And what's one of the easiest subjects you can do? And stupidly, I thought that drama would be one of them. But it turns out it's actually quite difficult. Can't act, can't remember lines, pretty bad at devising. And then we had like a really like old black box that had like some kit in, and we had a technician. So he said, well, I can see that you're really struggling with acting and directing, so why don't you try doing some lighting and sound? And really enjoyed lighting and really got into it. And I was always kind of told at school, like, you're not academic. I was dyslexic but didn't know it at the time. So it was like pretty terrible at like sciences, at maths, at English, like all the topics that everyone's always like, this is what you need to know. And I just really enjoyed lighting, and then started doing it at GCSE, and then they were like, oh, you can do it for A level. So that was really cool. And then after that, I was like, my parents really want me to go to uni, get a degree, but I don't know what to do. And then my technician, Pete, who is amazing, was like, you can go to drama school and you can get a degree doing lighting design. And I was like, whoa, this is mind blowing. Let's go do that. So I went and did that. And then came out of drama school, really enjoyed it, although I did spend most of my first year not paying attention and getting stoned, not gonna lie. But then became a bit more productive, and really got into it. And my tutors were really great. So I was at Rose Bruford, and my two tutors were really good at like, there's one thing that my tutor Ben said to me that always sticks with me, and I use for every show, which is like, every single light that you use, you have to justify, and it has to have a purpose. Like, you can't ever just put anything on stage and be like, it's because it looks cool. Because it's like, no, that is not, you can't justify it with that. Like, it has to help the narrative and the story. And that really stuck with me, because I remember having an argument with him, because I was like, no, Ben, because it looks really cool, that's why I want to do it for my end of year show. And then realised, no, Jess, that is the wrong way to design. But yeah, came out of uni, and then I came out of uni and was just like, I don't know what to do with my life. I don't know what to do. Really want to do lighting design, but it means that I need to like do crew and stuff. And like, I did have a few experiences of crewing, but kind of like bad experiences in a way, because like I'm quite small and I'm female. People judge me quite a lot, and were like, are you sure you can carry it? We're quite patronising, and because I was young at the time. So then that really put me off and really knocked my confidence. So I needed to pay the rent. So I worked at Burberry in retail on the shop floor for a bit. Then decided after like a year, I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm going to go travelling and find myself and like peace. So I went and did that. And then I came back, worked at Chocolate Shop part-time, and then finally got a lighting job doing an opera. And then from there on, I quit my part-time job, which for me was like a big deal, because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to like make rent, but I'm just going to have to do it. Basically, my partner, he was like, if you don't do it now, you're never going to know. You just need to take the plunge. Yeah. And if I need to get a job, then I'll just have to get a job somewhere else. But then, yeah, it kind of went on from there, and it went all right. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you took the plunge, because I mean, it's gone well.
All right.
I wonder, like, I mean, it's no secret that you've in recent years absolutely exploded onto the scene, constantly producing, as I said to you, very beautiful work. I wonder, could you tell us about the kind of work that really excites you, and the kind of stuff that really makes you want to get up and go in the morning?
Weirdly, it's like any script that I read and I go, how the hell do you stage this? That's what gets me really excited, because in my head I'm like, I'll have snippets of things that will kind of be like, oh, this reminds me of like this movie, or this reference from this artist and stuff. But then yeah, so that's what gets me really excited and gets me really like, I want to meet this director, and I want to meet I just want to meet a team and kind of get talking about what everyone thought about it, because for me it was kind of mind-blowing that you'd even think about staging this, because it's like, how do you do that? So it's like a jigsaw puzzle you have to put together. That's quite exciting.
Yeah, definitely, it's the challenge that's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned briefly at the beginning there the incredible news that came out yesterday that you're going to be lighting Dick Whittington in the Olivier Theatre. I mean, can you tell us a little bit, how did that job come to be?
Yeah, I also freaked out when that happened, because I was like, whoa, what the hell? Which is really cool. So that came about, so I did Equus, and Ned Bennett, who's directing Dick Whittington, directed that. And the team that we had on that was like, was amazing, and basically just really got on with the way that Ned directs and the way that he works creatively. And that's what yeah, and then basically he got asked to do this, and then he asked if they could availability check me for it. And yeah, and then we've gotten the ball rolling and had some creative talks, and it's, yeah, quite exciting.
That's fantastic. On the subject of those creative talks, I'd love to sort of start at the very beginning and sort of work through your process and how you interact with and invent with your fellow creatives in the team. So, I mean, how early in the process do you generally find you get brought on board?
It's getting earlier and earlier. So I remember there was a time where they'd literally just be like, oh, you just come in on the first day of rehearsals, and then we kind of start, which for me was always really weird anyways, because I was like, oh, but what if there's something in like the set that I'm like, hey, why don't we do a lighting thing there that we can integrate together? Or like, we need to talk about also like the staging of, like, there's a lot of things where I was like always a bit like, oh, but now it's becoming a thing where I get brought on pretty much as soon as like they've got the designer, so the set and costume designer, as soon as they've got the designer, then pretty much then I come on board like straight after. And before even the final model box meeting, we'll have lots of creative conversations.
Yeah.
And that's how I prefer to work, so that we can start talking and deconstructing the script, and like dramaturgically trying to figure out what it all means, really.
Yeah. And so when you, I mean, I'm keen to hear about those, how you start those conversations about light and the way that it might contribute to telling a story. I mean, do you generally approach a director and designer with ideas sort of and suggestions in mind, or do you go in completely blank and just see where the conversation takes you?
I think I like to, so I think when I first meet the director for like the kind of sit down talk, usually in a cafe somewhere, but now on Zoom these days, I try to, they usually will send the script, and I'll always try and read. But so like if it also goes manic, then they always say, oh, like, you know, of course we understand if you can't read it in time, but I always try and like skim read it at least if I can't do a proper sit down. But usually I do a proper sit down and like go through it all. And then the way that I like to do it is I actually like to just like, if something reminds me of like a film reference, or like an artist, or kind of anything, or even of like something that happened to me on the street, or like it doesn't necessarily for me have to just be about lighting. It could also be about my emotional response to that text. So yeah, so say for example, it reminded me of when I got on the bus and I had an interaction with a lady randomly and we became friends or something. Then I'll have that in my mind, and then when I see the director, then it's good. We tend to talk about what ideas we kind of both had, and what their kind of vision on it is, and what the style it is that they kind of want to do. And it's quite interesting because like the more I've done it, the more confident I've gotten also in my analysis, I guess. Because like when I first started doing it, I was really like, oh, but like, why should I, like, that's not my position to say something that's not related to lighting. But now now that I've done it more and more, it's actually, it's like the collaborative process of everyone talking about everything is really important, because it means that you understand exactly what's going on stage, or exactly why that moment that character's having that emotional response, and you're like, well, let me help to support that. And what's the subtext under something that you can really dig at, and you can really refer to that within the lighting.
And are those conversations, I mean, are they ever hard to get going? I mean, especially with a new team, or the first time you meet people, do you ever find those conversations hard to start?
Sometimes they can be, and that sometimes is a red flag of like, oh, maybe this might not be the right, because it's finding the right creative communication, I guess, with your team, or with, I guess the first person would be the director. And if you have that line of communication, because there have been some times where it's been quite difficult, or I've had it before where directors just said, but what would you do lighting wise? And for me, that kind of puts me off, because I'm like, oh, well, you just think I'm just my department. But really, as a whole team, we're trying to aim for the same thing. So it means that we all need to understand what each other are doing, but as well as that, we need to understand the text and what the script is doing and what the narrative is doing. It's really important.
So when you're approached about production, I completely agree about the red flag thing. Do you find that it ever is a sort of make or break factor when you find out who the rest of the team could potentially be? Set designer, director, video or sound, or do you find that that's something that you take quite a lot of consideration over before agreeing to be a part of a project?
I mean, I guess actually, I guess my thing is actually, if I just really love the text, and if that's the thing that pulls me in, the text and the story, and the way that the director, when I meet them for the first time, has kind of said their kind of vision and their style of it, and if that's gotten me excited, so I get quite giddy. And I become like a little kid in a sweet shop. I become a bit too enthusiastic in meetings sometimes, which I think some people can be like, Jess, you just need to chill out. But but that so as soon as I have that meeting and I'm like, oh god, I'm getting really excited, I'm getting all of these ideas in my head, and then I'm like, right, that means that I want to do this, and it would be really great if they want me on board, because there's just something inside of me that it's just sparked a creative kind of flame.
It's a great feeling, because when you know, don't you? And it's such a wonderful feeling.
It's such a great feeling of just being like, wow, this is amazing, and this is exciting. Also, like, this text, this narrative, this story is really exciting to tell an audience, and also the relevance of it and like what it does. The importance of also storytelling. It's something that we've done for so many years, and it's how it's evolved, like how it's evolved into like theatre, how it's evolved in theatre, and also how it's evolved on TV, Netflix, film, even in art, like in an art installation, that's always trying to tell a story, and photography. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned about you getting sort of brought on earlier and earlier in the process, which is fantastic. So it means you avoid nasty surprises at a model showing. But how much input do you generally have in things like the set design?
I guess it depends who it's with and how involved lighting needs to be within that set. but then there's also like, it doesn't also, I always find that it's always good to kind of know, even if lighting isn't like necessarily really integrated, like there's sort of LED tape everywhere and all the boxes or whatnot, but it's always good to have, because if they have, for example, if they plonked a tree on stage where it's like stage left and you're like, oh, actually from the rig plan it would be great if it moved like a meter that way, and then it means that I can get a good rigging position to get a really nice shadow onto stage. So even though it's not necessarily putting things within the set to build in it, it's like you can slightly move things around, of course if the designer lets you, but usually they are really accommodating. They're like, oh, that's a great idea, and you know, you can talk about stuff like that. Or if the designer's like, oh, well, the reason I've put this here is so that you could get shadows from this to that, and you can also have your input of like, oh, well, that might not work, but maybe if we did it this way, or if we, you know, so you can have like early conversations about that.
Yeah. Do you have like a worst nightmare when it comes to a bit of set? I mean, is there something that appears at a white card that just makes you go, oh no, please no?
Ceilings.
Yeah. It's always a ceiling.
If anyone, there was a set where they were literally going to put in a full ceiling, and the head of lighting was like, no, you can't do that to Jess because that's really evil. And I was like, thank you very much, that
Thank
saved
you.
my bacon.
Yeah, that's good teamwork there, isn't it? That is brilliant.
It's such good teamwork. But yeah, I get, what's your worst nightmare, would you say?
Oh, I wasn't ready for that. I think it's probably, yeah, full walls. Um, like full walls, especially ones that are shiny. That just, yeah, because you sort of want to dodge it, but then I don't mind a shiny floor because you can sort of, it's quite forgiving. You can hide some dodgy focus cuts on that. But yeah, shiny walls would be the thing that I would never want.
I know. Oh.
I wonder, could you tell us a little bit about the process that you go through when you are designing a piece? And I mean, the stages, particularly interested in the stages where you start voicing those things to other members of the creative team, you know, things that are otherwise internal design thoughts.
Oh wait, so when I start to just like talk to the other team about like,
Yeah, just sort of like the process that you go through, you know, do you start off with maybe research and then produce, like, do you keep that research for yourself, or do you show them, or you know?
oh, okay, yeah, usually usually I'll just like get loads of images or like film reference. I like just love movies, and I love taking film references for stuff. So like I usually just take all of them, and then usually there's always a Pinterest board. A designer somewhere will always have a Pinterest board going, and then it'll always be like, oh, can you share that with us? Or if you start off a Dropbox or anything like that, and then just start putting reference images in. And usually I quite like to share kind of references, to also see like what references they've picked up and what I have, what all of us have in common. But also it's interesting what you don't have in common, and it's like, oh, why did you pick that? That's interesting, because obviously everyone has a very different perspective of when you read a script, because no one has the same experience of what they've been through also in like in life in general. So it's really interesting to find other people's perspective and what they found.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. When you you know, a lot of what we do is all about close collaboration, and particularly things like with a sound designer. I mean, how do you spark up those conversations and build that relationship and that trust before getting into tech? Because I mean, there's nothing worse than arriving at tech and not being on the same page ideas wise as the person next to you.
It's true that it's like what nightmares are made of. Usually, I think it's usually just making sure to have loads of conversations with the team beforehand, and like always making sure that there's just like every so often just being like, hey, why don't we just have a little team meeting on the side, or is everyone free at like, annoying, but at a lunchtime or like after rehearsals or something, just to have a quick like catch up and what everyone's thoughts are, which usually like the director is quite good at enforcing and being like, hey guys, let's get together. But I'll always make an effort to also get to know to also get to know the team in a really also in a friendly way,
Mm.
because I also just want to get on with people and have a good time and like make something together. And when you're making a show together, it's something that's quite special. Um, and whether you go through a really easy tech or if you go through a really hard tech, you create a bond with these people who you work with, and it's quite beautiful. So yeah, just always making sure to kind of like check in, and if there's any ever like a time where I'm like, oh, I've got an idea for something that involves sound now, and I'll always make sure to just like message them or talk to them about it, and also vice versa. So it's like creating an environment where people feel comfortable enough to talk to each other or to say, oh, I've got this idea, and to never feel like, oh God, I don't know, maybe this idea is a bit stupid. Like it's like no matter what your idea is, it's always just be like, I've just got this idea and it might be shit, but I'm going to say it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I remember a lecturer of mine saying that, you know, the best idea in the room is the best idea in the room. It doesn't matter who said it, and
Mm.
it's about having the sort of, I suppose, the safety net of feeling that you can throw everything out there, and some of it will be fine, and some of it won't be, and that's how you find the better things, isn't it?
It's so
Um,
true.
when you're discussing the initial concept for a show, and you are starting to think about the design, what do you feel is the biggest obstacle that you face or that you keep coming across? I mean, whether that's personally or it's a wider industry thing, what feels like it limits your ideas the most?
Mm.
It's a big question to throw at you. Sorry.
That's a huge question. Yeah, I don't know. It kind of it depends on. That is quite difficult. I mean, I guess one of them, which I think we've all felt, is budget.
Yes.
um, it always gets in there, but I always try and make any challenge a creative, fun challenge. Like even though like budget always comes up, and you're like, oh, I'm never quite able to get exactly what I want. It's like, but then that means that like it's exciting because it's like you have to creatively think about it in a new way. It's like, oh, this space. Yeah, I guess it's.
Yeah, that was sort of my, when I was putting it together, I was like, my things were like financial or like time, if you're not brought on with enough sort of time, human resources, people not agreeing with your thoughts, and yeah, it can be a
Yeah,
really.
I would agree with definitely all of them. Yeah, time is a huge thing. Time is like, oh God, so many times. But also like rehearsal time. I always find that I'm always like, please, can we have more rehearsal time? Or like tech time.
Yeah,
It seems to like always get smaller and smaller and smaller.
yeah,
Yeah, tech time, because that's your time to create and that's your time to play, and you can talk about your ideas until the cows come home, but until you get it right in front of you and you're like, yes, I'm in my element, let's have a play, let's um like see what it looks like on stage all together with the set, everything. And also it's fun because that's the moment where you put everything together, and also everyone has mad ideas and
yeah.
everyone can riff off of each other, and it's really great. But there's never enough time, I always find, for that. So you end up being like, I've got this sick idea, but it's going to take like an hour to program. And then it's like, is that possible in this time? Probably not. So it's always, yeah, I think, yeah, definitely agree with that.
When you're sort of talking there about you know, everyone throwing ideas around, I mean, do you ever, how involved in rehearsals are you? I mean, do you get heavily involved in the creation of like the piece as a whole, or do you just sort of, for lack of a phrase, leave them to get on with it and pop in and out?
I really like to be in rehearsals as much as possible, which is really difficult because before all of this, obviously, when as you know, like working, you end up like piling quite a few shows on top of each other, which can be quite stressful. Um, but I always try and be in rehearsals at least like a minimum of 2 to 3 days a week. Hope like 3 actually minimum, and like maximum like, yeah, obviously 4 or 5. I try and be, yeah, I just try and be in there as much as possible because I find it really important, even from the very, because I know that usually like for the first week they'll sit down together, and they'll read the script and they'll dissect it. And a lot of people might be like, oh well, I'm not very useful in that point because that's just not part of their process. But for me, it's like I love them moments because they also find stuff in the script, and it's also at that point that ideas start to develop. And in order to understand why ideas have developed into what they've become, you need to understand that journey almost, so that you as a designer can really help to tell that narrative, and you can believe in that. And also it means that if there's anything where you're like, I'm really unsure of why that's become the way it's become in a certain scene, can we like just have a chat about this so that I understand that narratively, so that you can do it justice essentially. But for me it's really important from the very start of rehearsals to try and be in as much as possible, to really understand the text.
Yeah. And do you, when they sort of get to that more physical bit where they get up from the table and they start that sort of thing, do you ever request any sort of like R&D on any projects? You know, maybe, I don't know, bring a few fixtures into a room and experiment with the ways that that could contribute to telling a story?
Kind of. Usually I ask for like test runs out of the rehearsal room, because usually they'll be like, we don't have enough time to rehearse, right? You don't want to take it out of rehearsal time. So I'm like, cool, I'm just gonna go. Like I always like try, if there's like an idea where I'm like, oh shit, I don't know if this is gonna work. I remember for Equus we asked for quite a few test days where we go into the theatre and we test like these ideas, or or they would come in at lunchtime and we just like put a sheet up and we just like test some stuff on the sheet. Always try and get like times, always try and get some stuff in and some extra time to be able to test stuff if I'm kind of like, oh, this might not work in the theatre,
Yeah.
and we don't have enough time to put that fire out when it comes. So let's put that out now.
Yeah. Do you, what point in rehearsals do you start to sort of feel a sort of cue synopsis starting to come together, a structure of that? I mean, is that a slow process for you, or is it a sort of last minute essential, as it were?
That's quite, it's I'd say it's like, maybe that's also why I like to go into rehearsals quite a lot, is because through that whole time of going into rehearsals I start to see, I'm still not digital yet, so I always have to have a paper script because I just love it. But I also have little post-it notes. So I always will start putting post-it notes straight into my script, even at the very start of the read through, even from the very first time they do a read through with the actors on the first day of rehearsals. And then it's great because they're post-it notes, you can just move them around. But yeah, that's just I don't know, it's something, I think it's like just instinct. When you hear people read a script, sometimes your instinct just goes, there's something there and I don't know what it is. Even if you don't know what the cue's going to look like,
Yeah.
what your rig is yet, you just have this instinct of like, there's some kind of a change in tone there, or there could be a change in action. Let me just put a post-it there and then I'll come back to that later.
Yeah. And do you ever run those ideas past a director, or do they sort of stay very much yours until you present them in the venue?
I think if they're really big, if they're quite major, then I'll always, as soon as I have the idea, when it's an appropriate moment, then I'll let the director know, and just be like, hey, I had quite a big lighting idea here. Like, what's your thoughts on this? Is this right? Is this the right lighting language that we're trying to use? But then also vice versa, like if there's something that comes up in rehearsals, I'm always like, if anyone sees anything in rehearsals that they're like, this could be a light-in moment, or we could do this, then also feel welcome to come and talk to me about it. But also it's quite useful in rehearsals if you have an idea of like a very strong lighting language, for example. I don't know, say that you were like, every time someone says the word dog, it goes red. But like, if say for example that is the idea, and you say in rehearsals, you say, to the director, like, I just had a thought, maybe we could do this every time someone says dog, but you can utilize that in your rehearsal rooms. So that means that starts to get the whole of the room and the actors and the director and the movement, like, to start thinking about how they can start incorporating the lighting also into their actions.
Mm. Mm. I always find that during a focus, you sort of end up having quite a lot of little pockets of time to yourself to think while someone's moving a scope or whatever they're doing. Do you ever stand there and think, oh my word, I really hope that like creatively I've understood what we're going for, and everything that I'm focusing in this, I don't know, this cluster of something is really what we're going for, or I'm in trouble. Have you ever had that moment?
Oh yeah, like all the time. Like, I've got to say, like focus is like my nightmare. I really don't enjoy focus, which is really essential to the job. Because I love like putting everything together. When you do focus, you have to like look at something really no, yeah, wait, because there's holistically and macro and micro. So you have to look at something really micro. But I really enjoy looking at something macro. So like the composition of stuff, I really enjoy. But in order to get to that, you have to look at the
Yeah,
micro. So yeah, but yeah, that has happened to me so many times where I'm in focus and I'm like, this I think will work. Yeah, okay, let's just try it. Let's see what
yeah,
I always have like my notes of like all of where everything's going to be focused, but sometimes obviously that like a set piece can get in the way that someone's done the measurement funny, or I don't know, something's gone a bit awry. So you have to then think on your feet of like, oh, actually, no, that means that this has a knock-on effect to the next like 5 lights that we're focusing. So then that means you have to act quite quickly and be like, actually, let's think on our feet and think about it in a different way. Or sometimes you'll also see a set piece and you'll go, oh, it's so obvious now. Why didn't I put a light through that doorway? So then you're like, okay, what can I jig around? So it is really fun, but it's also just like sometimes a very annoying puzzle. It's
yeah.
something you just can't get that piece right.
Yeah, I think the micro macro thing's so true. It's such a skill, isn't it, to be able to look at something completely out of context and in such detail, in one light out of a whole system, and not to waste your whole time on that one thing because you've got the big
Yeah.
picture in mind. It's so hard, isn't it?
It's so true. And to not get like, sometimes I can get really obsessed with one line very easily. So if you're like, oh, this isn't quite right, maybe it needs to be like an inch this way, maybe it needs, and then like, yeah, that's like the micro of it. And then you're like, oh shit, but in the macro of things, it's actually not like, I don't need to get so stressed about this line.
Yeah.
Um, but it's very easily done.
I want to talk a little bit about how you use your plotting time. I mean, some people are really keen that it's just their time, and other people feel that it's the LD and the director's time, and it's very, very precious. I mean, how do you approach your plotting sessions?
Um, I usually, I mean, I always try it and like push so that I get like minimum of like 4 hours plotting, like absolute minimum. Also depending on what scale of the show is. Um, like yeah, so say it was somewhere like the Royal Court, then I'd want something with like 4 hours, and then I'd do the first hour of just me and the programmer creating effects that I know that I want, or creating things that I know that will be complicated or time consuming in the tech to do. And then the next 3 hours, I always usually ask the directors to then come in, and then we can, and I'll also have some cues ready, and then start going through cues. Yeah, that way.
Do you have anything that you feel is an absolute must that you have to have in one of those plotting sessions? I mean, that's whether it's a DSM or like a packet of Percy Pigs. I mean, what's one thing that you feel you have to have in a plotting session?
I would say, I would say sound designer.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah, because usually I know a lot of people will be like, "Oh, you just want to be focusing on light," but also, well, I guess it depends also on what kind of a show it is. But it was like, for example, on Seven Methods, it was really like interlinked with like literally every single cue was a MIDI. So because it was so interlinked, like my plotting session was actually like really useful to also have sound there, because sometimes I'd be like, we'd be plotting and I'd be like, oh god, I've gotten a bit stuck. And I also riffed quite a lot from a sound designer, because sometimes I'd be like, hey, what are you guys doing? and they'll play something, and I'll be like, great, okay, I've got it. I've got what you're trying to do. Let me help you out here and do some lightning things there.
Yeah, it can be really handy when they're just sort of doing their own work, but you can just sort of just a quick one. What does
Yeah,
it sound like if?
yeah, it's always really useful, and and also it's that thing again with time where I'm kind of like, I'm like, obviously need to get my plotting done, but also I'm very aware that like everyone else also needs to get stuff done, and time is always of the essence. So I'm always like, if a sound designer wants to sit in on my plotting time and just like tap away on QLab or whatever, I'm always like, please, like, you're welcome to also do that.
Yeah.
I'm not like, everyone has to get out of the room.
It's my time.
It's lighting time. Get out.
We sort of touched on the fact that, I mean, tech is either a very stressful, intense affair, or it can be an incredibly satisfying sort of amalgamation of brilliant ideas. When you start the tech, how much do you have in the desk, and ideas wise? I mean, do you start with a solid idea of what you want to do, or do you find that it just completely morphs and alters as you go along?
Oh, God, both. Yeah, there's been times where like there's been times when like you start a tech, and because it's everything also coming together, a director might be like, oh no, we've done this all wrong, we need to change it completely, and you're like, oh god, okay. So then you have to like, uh yeah, I guess one thing I always do with my rig is I always try and make sure that it's flexible enough to switch it to adapt, basically flexible enough to be able to adapt, but still to be able to support the real core ideas, and like light and language and all of that you've kind of set up already. But there have been moments where I remember in Seven Methods there was a moment where I was like, so basically Seven Methods was like, they were on Twitter, and then they were like in the bedrooms. There was like naturalistic and then internet world. And when they were on the internet and like on Twitter, you have like retweet, quote tweet, post tweet, and like and all of this. And for every single one of them, I was going to do like a lighting effect, but I wasn't going to do one for post. And then we got into tech, and I watched it, and I went, I have to do something for post tweet, but that meant that added an extra 300 cues instantly to the rest. Which also, like, Elena, the sound designer, was like, what? After MIDI, what? But yeah, so then that completely changed. Like, so that went from like a tech where I was like, this is really manageable, to a tech where I was like, actually, this could get quite crazy and quite messy. But also, it has to be done because we have to try it.
Yeah. And do you find that you ever sort of those realizations like that you go, basically it's essential, but it's quite time consuming and a little bit tricksy. Do you ever sort of go, listen, I am going to do this, but that's maybe a in previews thing? Do you find that you delegate jobs differently to the what's now versus what's down the line?
Yeah, 100%. I definitely like, yeah. So if there's anything that's either really complicated, or like if there's an effect that's really time consuming, then usually I'll just say to the programmer like, how long do you think it will take? And if it takes longer than 10 minutes, then usually I'll just say, well, let's write that in the notebook, and we'll note that for later, and we'll just add that into that queue when we have time at some point to do it. But yeah, and then also if it's something where me and the director, or anyone else, we kind of disagree on something, and that's not in a negative way, it's just in a way where you're like, where they might suggest, oh, why don't we do this here, and you're kind of like, oh, I don't know, I don't like, could you explain to me why you want to do that particular lighting state for this moment, like what is the, and you kind of delve into the reason for that, because sometimes you can disagree with the director, and it happens, and it's fine to also like to say, oh well, I don't necessarily agree with that, or I don't see where you're coming from, can we talk about it? Because also whatever you believe in, like artistically, you also have to make sure that you kind of stick to that, because sometimes like everyone can get very can get caught up in the moment and it's like, oh, or panics and goes, we need to change everything, so we need to, so sometimes you just need to be like, actually no, what are our core principles for helping with this narrative? What is our light and language? Why are the reasons that we're panicking? And you know, what is it that's making us panic, and what should we actually be changing and focusing on, rather than panicking and being like, we need to change everything, and just so always got to kind of think about that very logically, even in stressful moments.
Yeah, you mentioned flexibility, which is obviously a big part of it, and a big sort of get out of jail option when you need it. What are some of the things that what would you class as, you know, I'm putting this in for flexibility? What are some of the essential flexible things that you have?
I would say a luster. So just which is my just everything that like LED. Well, I love tungsten so much, but sometimes I'm so indecisive about color. Sometimes I'm so indecisive about it. So if I'm ever like, I'm really unsure about this moment or like color wise, I'll usually just be like luster or color source.
Yeah, yeah,
Usually my get out of jail card.
yeah.
Like
That was a good bet. That's a safe bet.
Also, I do also like to always make sure there's some frost 119 floating around somewhere.
The most forgiving of all the frosts.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Do you feel that over the course of a tech, or I mean, sort of over the course of the whole show, do you feel that your relationship with your team shifts when you're teching, and sort of as you discover how each other works? Do you feel that relationship changes as you go along?
I think the trust begins to build even more there, and really fast pace, because you start to realize, because also I think you learn a lot from people and how they react to being under pressure,
Mm.
because some people can kind of buckle, and that's fine too, because I've had that also many a times, but you kind of, because you kind of learn how they communicate, or what they actually mean, or their kind of creative language, you can help to like support them, or vice versa, they can also support you, which is quite nice.
Yeah, yeah. It can be a strange feeling, can it? Because sometimes I think you find that it feels like things get very, very tense, and sort of, you know, not, your opinion doesn't change of someone, but you suddenly go, oh wow, this isn't what I expected. But then when you go to the pub at the end of the night, it's like it never happened.
Yeah,
It's a really nice sort of leave it in the room thing that you develop with the team, I think.
yeah, it's a very like, but work is work, and like I like really get on with you. It's not a personal thing at all. It's just like, um it's also because I always find it comes because like people can get stressed about something, sometimes at you, but that's because they're doing it in a really passionate way,
Mm.
and they're really passionate about the show, and they really want to make it the best that it can possibly be. So sometimes they can take it out on you, but so it's not a personal thing at all. It's just like I just need to show you how much I love the show.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've all, so on that sort of same note, I mean, we've all had the, you know, what do you think to the director, and they go, I don't like it, and you know, you feel totally stuck, and how do you move past it? I mean, do you have any tips on how you react and deal with sort of creative block when you're in tech?
Mm, usually I always remember, like there was one show that I did, and after the first preview, the director literally was like going through everyone and then said lighting and went, just let's have a conversation outside, and I literally was like, oh god, that basically means like they do not like it and they don't want to tell everyone in the room, even though they basically did by saying, can you step outside? But then I stepped outside, and I was also quite young at this point, and I was quite new into the industry, so I had like no confidence at all, and I was really timid, and I think the thing that I should have done, because they basically was like, oh well, you haven't quite gotten what I was saying about the style, about this, and the first thing that happened was that I internally just went, oh my god, it's all my fault, oh my god, it's like you know, and it just knocked my confidence even more. But I think at that moment you have to try as hard as you can to go, okay, well, where have we where has our communication essentially like stopped working? Why did we misunderstand each other? And yeah, I think just be honest and just say like, yeah, looking back on that, I wish that I would have gone, oh, okay, so let's look at this very rationally and logically, like what is it that has what is it that you're not exactly happy about, and how can we go about improving this, and let's have a conversation creatively about it.
Yeah, I think that's a really valuable thing, isn't it? Take a breath, take a step back. Where has it gone wrong? Because if you can't solve where it's gone wrong, then you can't solve the problem really, because it's going to keep happening, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to keep happening. And I think the easiest thing, and the thing that automatically happened when I did it, was like, it's all your fault, and just blamed it on myself, and then it made my confidence go. And it's really hard to not do that at that moment, but always try my best now to, like, if that ever does happen, to not be like, it's all your fault and that's why the show's shit. Because it's not at all. It's to do with like, it's also to do with the communication. Like if you work with someone and you communicate very differently, it means that things get lost in translation. So you shouldn't always feel like it's your fault.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's so true. It's like we were sort of talking briefly before this, weren't we, about the sort of imposter syndrome thing, and how we all have a sense of imposter syndrome, which is, we all have it, but it's in some ways ridiculous, because you're on the job because people want to work with you. They want your work, your style, the art that you make. They want that there. So try not to sort of get yourself down too much about it, really.
Yeah, that's very true.
What's your relationship like with your programmers? I mean, how involved are they in, your ideas and creating that vision beyond, just inputting a lot of data?
But oh god, programmers are so important to me, because a lot of people would be like, oh, your programmer's just there to push buttons, and I'm like, no, they're more than that. They are so amazing. They translate all of my gobbledygook that I tell them into the desk. And that is so, like, I love to describe like a lot of effects with like sound effects. So it'll be like, I need this effect to be like wop 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 wop, and then like my amazing programmer will be like, I know what you mean by that. Or like, yeah, there's like certain things, but also they get to also understand how you work, and also your color palette that you like to use. Or sometimes you'll be having a complete block and your programmer will, like, all you'll have to do is just choose a color, but sometimes choosing a color can be the hardest thing in the world. And your programmer can, like, you've just got so much going on in your brain, and sometimes your programmer is just really great at being like, oh, this is what you meant, and I'm like, yes, that is, but I just couldn't get it out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Or it's so funny, you'll be like, which blue, I want that blue that we picked earlier, like the bluer blue of the bluest. Like, things like that, which is so funny, and they understand that. And that's when you find like a great programmer who, and also you get to just have a laugh with, and you get to have a good time. Because sometimes because with your team, like with the creative team, like, it's amazing, like, together, but sometimes, because you're all so intense and close, like, artistically, sometimes it's nice to have someone like your program also, who's just like not like linked to that in a way, if that makes sense. So they can kind of help to take you out of that, and you can be like, oh, let's just have a joke about, I don't know, about a Percy pig or something.
Yeah, they are sort of your best friend for the whole process, aren't they? They're who you spend the most of your waking day with, really.
Yeah, exactly. And you have that trust between you already, of being like, so for example, if I was to be like, oh, I want to create this effect, then they'll be like, oh, actually that's going to take me quite a long time, can we note that? And I'll be like, yeah, that's fine, that's cool, because I already know that they know what they need to do that for that, so then we have that trust.
Yeah, definitely. Have you ever found yourself in a situation in a tech where you just aren't clicking with one or more of the team? Particularly on shows maybe when you haven't worked together before. Have you ever found that there's sometimes, I don't know, whether it's a lapse in understanding or what it is? I mean, how do you deal with that if you come across that?
I'd say the job that I was talking about when he pulled me out of the room, I guess that, yeah, that was it's really difficult because it's really easy to get into your head and to be like, and it's really easy to get into your head and just be like, oh well, like I'm just shit.
Yeah.
But I think the best way to, it's really hard to do it, but the thing that I've kind of learned is to kind of just get on with it. Sounds really tough, but to kind of just be like, okay, well, we've clearly, well, also to realize what it is that's gone wrong in that communication. So I think that is so as soon as you know where you've lost communication or what it is exactly um, that you're not working together well for some reason, like as soon as you figured that out, I think that's where you can be like, okay, well now we can really focus on that in our professional relationship and figure out how we can make that better.
Yeah. Yeah. I've got a question here from Ellen. In your portfolio of work, you have quite a lot of installation work. How did you bridge into that world coming from a theatre background?
I would actually say that I started more in installation stuff than I did in theatre. And that was because at Rose Bruford they had a symposium where it was like a mini kind of festival of like people would come in and do talks and stuff. But then they'd also say to students like, oh, you can create installations. You can like put together a proposal for like an installation or like an art thing that you want to do. So I remember I worked with someone on the European Theatre Arts course, and then we created something called Lucid Sky, which was like loads of Chinese lanterns with fluffy bear cushioning on the outside to make clouds, and then I put fiber optics, so that was like somewhere where people can go and sit down, and it was like a zen room. And that was really nice. I did that, and then from there I kind of started doing, it was actually for a mate of a mate at uni that I started doing like festival work. So that meant that it was like kind of like cabaret DJ nights and stuff. And then that led to doing some kind of like immersive stuff. And like, I think I really love theatre and it's like a passion of mine, but also my actual other love is installation. Like I love installation lighting and I think it's so cool. It's so cool, but it's also like really amazing how you can immerse an audience in just purely in light, and how you can communicate so much through that, and also how much like as humans we're influenced by light emotionally. And there's like the whole psychology and science of light that I also find really interesting, which fits kind of a bit more into the installation side of things.
Yeah. Is it something that you would like to do more of then?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it is something that I'd like to do more of. Because I think I just find it quite fun to quite fun and quite interesting. Like James Turrell, Oliver Eliasson, the way that they explore light. I think it's like like I love storytelling, that's why I love theatre. And then I think the reason I also love art installation is the exploration of light and the different ways that you can use it, and also the history of it. So the history of lighting throughout the whole of time, from the very start of like the Big Bang to like now, and how we've started to use it as something that's not just practical but also very artistic. And it's really important, the design of light now, but also how obviously light came from the sun, and then it's how we as humans have made it man-made and made it something that we can control, which I find quite fascinating.
Yeah. It sounds like you need to make an installation in like the Curve at the Barbican or something,
Oh my
with
God.
the time process of light.
Yeah. I would love to do that. Get the sun in there and everything.
Yeah, get applying for that Arts Council grant now. Go on. Another question here from Sam. Time permitting, do you use any visualization?
Oh, no, I actually haven't. I am going to though for for Dick Whittington. I am going to,
Brilliant.
but I actually haven't before. It's quite fun.
Are you? You don't have to tell us if you're not allowed to, but what sort of thing do you hope to achieve with the visualization? Is it just to reduce the amount of time spent in a venue?
Yeah, I think it's just more for, again, time. So it's just the time that we have in tech is going to be. I'm just very aware also that because of the rules of like COVID, so that takes more time for how people kind of get on and off stage and their backs. So there's things where I'm just like, how can we just save time so that it means that we have enough time just in case anything like that goes wrong.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of mainly why I'm using it. But then there's like a fun thing that I really hope that I can do in the space, which means that I need to use pre-visualization stuff.
Nice, great. We will all buy our tickets now. Now you've said that. A question from Ian here. What advice do you have for a lighting designer who's been out of the industry for a while and wants to try and get back into the industry, but doesn't have much confidence post-COVID?
I would say like the way, I think the way that I did it, cause when I left for a bit and like traveled and then came back and worked part-time at a chocolate shop and stuff, I think the way that I got back into it was like I just like looked on arts jobs loads for like lots of different companies, which I know probably won't be as useful now because there's not as many people being able to create things. But I think also a way that I think that I'm kind of like, oh, I should have really done, or is a way that I was like, I could have done it this way, is just like contacting lighting designers and being like, can I like come and just like sit in on like tech or something? Can I come and just like sit in the room, or can we just like grab a coffee or just have a meeting and just start to also learn kind of how they kind of do things a bit, because I like never assisted or associated in that or did associate work, and I kind of regret that because there's probably a lot of things that I could have learned from that I don't know. Yeah, but I think just like reaching out to people, because that's also one thing I remember coming out of uni, and the reason why I didn't reach out to a lot of lighting designers was because I was literally like, who the hell is going to want to talk to me? Like, I'm a nobody who's just come out of uni, who's just like a recent graduate. Like, also they're probably too busy doing all of their stuff. But actually, like, the lighting design community is so friendly that like if you ever just message someone, they will always get back to you and be like, yeah, of course, let's grab a coffee, like let's have a chat. And I think that's a really like nice way. And I think also like if it does start up again, like I think apprenticeships are really great. I think they're such a good way of kind of getting to know how a production also works, like backstagey, the backstage kind of side of things.
Yeah. Jumping back to the process, let's say that you've teched the show and we're in dresses and previews. How involved are you in the noting process for a show? I mean, do you just stick to lighting notes, or do you like to generally offer up contributions for the piece as a whole?
My notes are kind of more lighting based, but if there's anything that really like pops up in terms of like a note for the whole show, then I'll note it. Or if there's something narratively that I'm like, I have no idea what's going on and I've read the script, then I'll be like, guys, I think there's something here that we need to look at. But also in a way, I also find that when it gets to that point, I also feel like it's not my place to always say, if that makes sense. So kind of
It can be tricky, can't it? I mean, I think it really depends on who you're working with, doesn't it? But I always feel like, well, we're there for the same reason. We're all trying to tell the same story, and it can feel very, pigeonholed. You are lights are your thing. But we're all contributing to the big picture, the macro.
Yeah, the macro thing is so true, because I remember that the first time that ever happened to me, that this director Debbie, who is bloody amazing, she's also a really lovely person. the first thing she said after preview 1 was, we sat down and she said, what does everyone think of the show? Like, she didn't even say like, okay, we're going to go through all of your departments. Her general note was like, I want all of your opinions on what you all think, because she trusted us.
Yeah.
And she was like, she understood that we were all there in order to make the show the best that it could be and to tell the story that it needs to tell. And that, I thought that was a really great thing that she did, of being like, but what do you all think, not just of your department, but also of the show, because you're also, as an audience, you're an audience member during the previews, so it's like another good way of, for them to get an insight to what the audience could feel. Yeah.
Question here from Sam. What is your planned drawing process? Do you draw, or do you get someone else to produce it for you?
I do it myself, and I actually do it all on CAD, on AutoCAD, which is like old school. But I am in the process of moving to Vectorworks, because it is, yeah, so much quicker. But yeah, I usually do it myself, and yes, usually do it on CAD. Yeah.
Do you have like a starting point? Like, what's your sort of, as you've got the blank venue in front of you, what's the first thing that you put on it to get you going?
I always do. It does take me quite a lot of time to get in the zone of starting a rig plan, because I'm like, oh no, it's like a mammoth job. But I think that the first thing I do, well, actually the first thing I do before I do the plan is, in rehearsals, I always have a list that I'll always keep with me of like all of the really key things. So for example, like face light, side light, and I'll be like, these are the general stuff that I need to have, backlight. And then I'll have another list where it's like specials, just so that I know everything that I need to have. And then I'll always write next to it, like I'll have the kit list, and then I'll write next to my each of them kind of general notes, like what I want to use for that. Yeah, so then that's how I start to collate it. And then the way I get myself kind of into doing it is that I'll always just start off quite basic with my key, just to kind of like get me excited about doing a rig plan.
Yeah, you know what's happening then, don't you? You can't go back. You've explained what lights mean what, that's it.
Yeah, it's like, I've started it, I am going to complete this.
So if no one else has any questions, please do jump in if you do have questions. But if no one else has any questions, I'm going to do what I'm lovingly calling the before you go round, which is just sort of 5 mini quick questions. So I'm going to start with something that you do to turn it around when you're having a bad day.
It's a really bad habit, but I have a cigarette.
Fair enough. What is your favourite interval snack during previews?
Oh, that's really hard. Ooh, I usually can't eat during a preview because I'm so nervous.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah. If you could click your fingers and become an instant expert in anything, what would it be?
Oh, I'd be an expert in marine biology. So random.
Wow, where did that come from?
I always wanted to be a scuba diving instructor, so maybe, yeah.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
That's probably it. Yeah, nothing to do with lighting, but love to learn about marine biology.
Yeah, that would be handy if you could click your fingers. I think that's quite a lengthy process normally, isn't it?
Yeah, it just takes too much time.
Yeah. Okay, you're putting out an advert for a creative team. 3 descriptors of what the ideal person on a creative team should be.
Fun, friendly, and wild.
Wild. Okay, great. I look forward to that on many job applications. And finally, if you had to write an autobiography right now, what would the title be?
Oh man, that's hard. Oh god. I don't know. Jessica Hong Young's Not So Long autobiography.
Yeah, great. It would have to say in brackets, not a marine biologist as well, of course.
Not very much.
Brilliant. Jess, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you for having me.
Been fantastic to hear all things Jess. Yes, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing what you come up with at Christmas, which I presume is going to be the first thing back for you. So yes, thank you so much, and we'll hopefully speak to you again soon.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me and for organising this. And thanks to everyone. Bye.
Bye.